Hello, welcome to TEC University's virtual classroom. Today, we're going to talk about change management. Now, many of you may be thinking, why should we talk about change management? It's going to happen anyway, right? The only constant in life is change. Whether we want it to come or not, whether we try to prevent it or not, change is coming and we have to deal with it. So the best thing that we can do is to be prepared. Here are some examples I'm sure we're all familiar with, and there are thousands of others, of companies, and I know hindsight's 20/20, but when you don't manage change properly, and you're not looking ahead, and you don't have some kind of a protocol for dealing with the change coming, it's hard to handle, it's hard to keep up with the times, and you see the failures that have happened before. Change management is so critical, especially in our fighting force, that it's one of our airmen's foundational competencies. So, how do we deal with change? What should we do? That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you a definition of change management. What does that mean to manage change? Also, and this is the most important part, I'm going to describe to you John Kotter's change management process. It's a tried and true, very well proven business model for handling change in an organization. Also, speaking of organizations, we're going to talk about what you can do to help your organization embrace change. Finally, we're going to talk about you. If you're joining me today, you're watching this program, you are a change leader. No matter what your rank, no matter what your position is in your organization, you are the leader in making change happen and making it change successfully. So what does that look like? Now, speaking of those of you joining me, if you have any questions, if you'd like to add anything in the chat, we are watching that. So let's hear from you at any time. So let's get right into it. What's the definition of change management? Well, change management is a discipline. It guides how we prepare, equip, and support individuals. Now, that's one of the two key elements, especially for me, when we look at change management. What are we really focused on? Well, we're focused on the people, and I know you've heard that before in all areas, and being an airman, our people come first. And that's the same thing when you're managing change. Also, the other key element, and of course, especially in today's military, we're looking at successful outcomes, right? We're trying to manage change so that we have good, positive, successful tactics and outcomes when any change comes along. So how do we do that? And what are some other things that we need to consider? There are quite a few things that we need to think about also with having a process in dealing with change, because it's a very difficult thing to implement, especially in a large organization. There are quite a few sources out there, and all of them pretty well line up with the same types of numbers. As you see with John Kotter, who wrote the change management process, about 30% of transformational programs succeed. And then you get about the same type of numbers here in a different study. Only 1 transformation in 3 succeeds. And then also with Fortune 500 companies, just take a look at how many have failed over the years. How many companies can you think of in your lifetime that were around maybe even 20 years ago that aren't today due to developing technologies and changes in our culture and lives? Unfortunately, with change, we have a 70% failure rate with Fortune 500 companies. Now, in our fighting force, in the Air Force, in what we do for a mission, we don't have the option for failure. So we need to look at what processes we have available that we can put in place to make sure we're successful when the next change comes down the line. So to begin with, that's something I always like to stress, whether you're writing a paper for school, whether you're calling your grandmother on the phone or chatting with your buddies, or you're implementing change in an organization. The very first thing we need to begin with is looking at our audience. Who are we speaking to? You need to know your audience, understand who you're speaking to, and really get an attack plan gathered with how you're going to deal with those people. So if you look at Rogers' innovation curve here, it's just a general whether you're adopting technology or any type of change. But what we're focusing on here is this first 15%. Those early adopters, the people that are on board early. Now, you might think, well, why should I focus on them? They're adopting the change right away anyway. They're my early adopters. The key factors here, as we're going to explain later, is you're addressing this change in the appropriate way. You're setting a climate for change. Are these people experiencing wins because they're adopting your change? And can the rest of the organization see that? So speaking of that and the process that we're talking about, we've began talking already about creating that climate for change, right? So here we have Kotter's 8-step change management model. And I know that looks like a lot. I even have it in different colors. There are 8 steps there, and there's quite a few of them. But as we go through it, with most things too, I know you've seen this before. Once we talk about them, you'll think, you know, that's common sense. Or I've seen that happen before in successful organizations. And I'll give you a few examples as we work through this model. Another bit of good news for you is that you can break down these 8 into 3 simple categories. And that's how we're going to talk about them today. You have creating a climate for change, engaging and enabling your organization, and implementing and sustaining that change. Let's begin with creating the climate for change. Now think about your organization. If a good friend of yours was thinking of joining the Guard or thinking of switching over to the Guard, coming to your organization, the very first thing I'm sure that you're going to talk about and they're going to want to know is, what's the climate like there? Because that makes all the difference, doesn't it? You know that, and I know that as well. It's the same thing when you're implementing change in your organization. What is the climate around that change? Is it negative? Is it positive? Is it active? Is it, a good positive change makes all of the rest of that percentages that we looked at earlier with your audience, it makes them want to come on board as well. So, that's great, but how do you create a good climate for change? That's what we're going to talk about next. You have 3 different things there: creating urgency, forming a powerful coalition, and creating a vision for change. Now there's some different elements. We'll talk about these individually. Let's begin with creating an urgency. Creating urgency, I want to go a little bit out of order than our bullets here. You want to engage emotionally, and you want to address complacency. Those two, to me, are both the same sides of the coin. On the opposite of that, you need to know, how do you do that? How do you address complacency and engage people emotionally at the same time? Well, for me, the best example that I can come up with is one that happened to me this week. When you have company coming over, that's when you get in a really big rush, at least in my house, and you really get into that deep cleaning, and you're running around the house and you're getting stuff done that you've been planning on doing for a month, and it happened. Well, that's what we're talking about when we talk about an honest external review. You have company coming over. Think about your organization and the last time you had a DV visit. That's when the yard's getting mowed, the windows are getting cleaned, things that we hadn't gotten to, you're really making things shine, and you've got some good energy behind all of the organization getting together and putting your best foot forward. It's the same thing here, no matter what change it may be. Get a good, honest external review, whether that's using some type of a survey system or having someone physically come and visit and do a review, do a salve. Look at what we've done with salves before. You've all experienced this urgency before. That's an easy way to do it to help promote the change in your organization that you want to see happen. Moving on from that, you need to create a powerful coalition. We never do anything alone, especially in the military, and that's a good thing, right? When you think of forming a powerful coalition, I know I've been on several Tiger teams before. Well, a Tiger team is a great idea. And one of the things that you need to do, though, is look at the groups of people that you're putting together on your team. Well, you want leadership, right? But you want leaders from all different levels. Of course, you want your leadership team, you want your experience, you want your wisdom in there, you want the rank in there to get all of that foundational knowledge, that organizational knowledge that already exists. But you know what? You also need airmen that are out there on the front lines, the people that are really dealing with that change. You want to involve them in your powerful coalition too, because they have experience and perspectives that you don't want to miss out on. That's where it's going to succeed or fail. is with the young airmen out in the field. Also, how do you get commitment? Well, the same thing that I was just talking about. When other airmen see their peers involved in this change, they see their peers are actually actively involved in this group, it makes them want to do it as well. If the more distanced that airmen are from it, the harder it is to gauge commitment and gain it. Also, let's create a vision. You need good communication, and this is something I'm going to say about 90 times throughout this presentation. Creating a vision, having good communication, hearing from your airmen, speaking to your airmen, it all comes back to having a good, clear, compelling vision that is aligned with all of our values. Now that can be our core values that we all know and love. It could also be the values of your specific organization and the values that you're trying to instill with this change. It can be that as well. Now, thinking about creating a vision, it needs to be clear, it needs to be compelling. No one wants a 2-paragraph mission statement. So we've talked a lot about climate, creating a climate for change, different things to consider with creating a climate for change. I want you to think about this as well at home. How can you positively affect the climate for change in your organization? And think about the change that you may be facing in your specific situation. I'll give you some examples that I've experienced in my lifetime. The implementation of seat belts. You know, we had them, but no one wore them when I was a kid. Now it seems even crazy to say that people wouldn't wear their seat belts. But that has been an effective, positive change that we've made in our climate and culture. So let's look at the next step here also. Engaging and enabling the organization. Like I said, we're going to talk a lot about communication, positive communication, good two-way communication. And that's where we're going to begin here. Communicate the vision. We just created a vision. We've got a clear, simple vision that's aligned with our values. How do you communicate it? Well, first of all, keep it simple. Think of a slogan. Think of all those companies out there, all of the mottos that many of you could recite to me right now. I'm not going to name any of them now, but there are thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them out there. They're catchy, they're short, you know what they mean, you know what their values are when you hear it. That's the same thing we need here. Going back to that seatbelt example, here in Tennessee we had click it or ticket. You know, it rhymes, it's short, we get the idea. It's a great slogan. Also, you need to address that change in multiple forms. You see the image of a cell phone there. Are you sending out messages? Is it happening in Commander's Call? Well, the message should be happening in Commander's Call. It should also be in advertisements. It should also be on the digital signage when you come and leave your base. Anywhere you can address this, any different way or method that you can use to communicate that vision, use it. And that leads right into the next bullet here with repeat, repeat, repeat. As much as you can say it, especially in the initial and then following through as well. It's a message that you need to hear over and over and over. It never hurts to hear it again. One key idea, and this is something that I'm going to reiterate over and over here today, is that you need clear feedback channels. You may be putting this message out and communicating the vision, or so you think. There's a difference in stating your vision and communicating it. Communication involves two-way communication. So there may be a message that you're putting out, and airmen aren't taking it in the same way that you mean it. You need to know that. You need to be able to hear that. So are there clear feedback channels coming back to you in how that message is being felt, how that message is being perceived? That is key also. And so when you're repeating, it's a message that's actually addressing the airman in the way you want it to. Speaking of communicating, speaking of getting that two-way communication going, that may be a barrier that we may need to remove. So I want to look at this in a little bit of a different way in which the bullets are listed here. We want to talk about training first. I mean, that's what's happening right now. We're doing training in change management right now. That's great. I'm a training and educational professional, so I'm biased. Of course, I love training. However, training may not always be the answer. There are also systematic things that we can implement to remove barriers. Now, what I mean by that is not a system in how to systematically remove barriers. What I mean by that is what in the system is broken? What in our system is a barrier? Look at our systems, and does it make it easier for airmen to implement this change, or does it make it harder? I'll tell you a great example there. I was Reg F maintenance for years. And of course, I'm sure all of us have heard of FOD before, especially if you're in maintenance. Well, that's a great example of removing systematic barriers. When we started talking about removing FOD in the flight line, you might not have needed a whole lot of training. Everyone knows right away that a nut or a bolt flying through a jet engine is a bad thing. However, what we needed there is to remove some systematic barriers. What made it so hard? So you saw the implementation of several things. So we had cutouts in our toolboxes, so you could see where all of the tools went easily just by glancing at it. That's a systematic removal of a barrier. Also, we had FOD cans placed throughout the different areas in the flight line on all the maintenance trucks, so you had an easily accessible trash can at all spots where FOD could go, rather than in an airman's pocket. That is a systematic removal of a barrier. So when we think about a lot of this change management, it may be simple things that are very, very, very helpful in getting airmen to implement these changes. It may not be training that you need to begin with. It may need a very simple way of them being able to physically do it. Let's go back to communication now, and moving back down to that second bullet where we talk about focusing on the airman and the supervisor. What are the relationships in the organization, and how does this change affect those relationships? Are airmen and their supervisors able to communicate about this change? How does it impact the relationship? How is the change being implemented? Is it forced? Is it suggested? Think about the airman, the supervisor, the relationship, and how that impacts the organization. And emphasize the positive, of course, at all times. How does this change make people's lives easier? How does it make our Air Force better? Moving on to short-term wins, talking about emphasizing the positive here. What are very quick, very visible, very easy short-term wins that you can put out there for your airmen? It's just think of a video game. Continually, when you're playing a video game, your guys getting leveled up, right? You're getting new weapons, you're getting new gear that you can use. It's always some type of a small, continually engaging win that you're making for doing whatever effort is that you need to do. It's the same thing here with change management. But some key things that you need to consider, though, is are these wins visible? Can everyone in the organization, think back to that audience that we talked about earlier, you had a good half of your organization are going to wait and wait and wait to implement it. Are they seeing the people, those change agents mentioned at the bottom of this screen, are your whole organization, can all of the people there see the people who've gotten engaged in this change get these wins? Can they see the positives that they have happen to them because they've engaged in your change process? Finally, and again, I'm going a little bit out of order here on purpose, I want to talk about whether these wins are clearly related to the change effort. That is key when you're talking about communicating to an entire organization. The win has to directly be tied to the change itself. Hey, you see this airman followed along with this plan, they started going along with this change right away, and look at all of the positive things that's happened in their career, in their personal lives because of that. And it needs to be directly because of that. Okay, so think for just a moment now with engaging and enabling your organization. Think about that communication. Think about the statements that you're putting out, the communication you're receiving or not. How can you engage and enable your organization? So let's move on to our final step here. We're in the home stretch. And this is where a lot of people like to lay off here. You've put in that really good hard work. You've gotten a team together that we talked about before. You've got a good vision. You've got a mission statement. You're communicating it well. Everyone's on a positive level and knowing why this change should happen. You've got people engaged. Smooth sailing, right? Well, don't give up. The final step here is a key and crucial element, and it comes once you've got this change rolling. How do you really implement the change and sustain it? You don't want to go through all of that work just to have everything backslide, and 2 years later, everything's back to the way it was. We don't want that to happen. So how do we keep it from happening? How do we sustain change in an organization? There we're going to talk about building upon the change that we've already begun, and we're going to talk about anchoring that change. So set small goals at the start. Focus on those successes. What are your wins? Maybe they're small. Maybe you didn't achieve everything right away, and that's okay. Focus on what you have achieved. Focus on what wins that have happened. Look at what you can reinforce. Look at those barriers again that we talked about earlier. Right away, the really big barriers, the really big things should be evident, and you should address those immediately. But now that you've implemented the change, now that your organization is working through that change, how do you address what barriers remain? Things can always be made better. Those of you that have been working in Kaizen methods and Lean Six Sigma methods, things like that, you're very well aware of this idea and this topic. Talking about green belt processes, black belt processes, there are always barriers and things that you can make easier, make smoother, even if it's just the organization of an office. So what other things can you do to help make this change easier, and part of our culture? Speaking of making it a part of our culture, we need to anchor the change. We need to make it a part of our daily operations, just a part of who we are. Again, think back to that seatbelt wearing that I mentioned earlier, or FOD on the flight line. I know you've all experienced both training in both of those. You've all seen ads for both of those as well in the Air Force, right? That's where you see that change being anchored. Look, our daily operations. Do you have FOD walks? Do you have people checking that magnetic bar on the front of the truck? Is it just a part of what you do every day now? Also, again, with training and development. Maybe your airmen aren't totally equipped to deal with this change. Have training, have development in how airmen can better utilize this change to make their lives easier, better, more fulfilled by using this change. A key idea here is to make it a part of policy and culture. Again, with the seatbelt example. Once the seatbelt laws came into effect and it's a law, you can't come onto base without your seatbelt being on, it became a part of the culture. When I got up and drove here this morning, I got in the truck, drove here, I didn't even consider whether or not I put my seatbelt on. I just did it. It's just who I am, right? A final thing, and this is true in every aspect of our lives, now that you've achieved some type of success, it's not time to sit back on our laurels. Always continue to evaluate. Continue to assess how things are going. Are things going as they should? Should we implement new change? Maybe it's time to step back and look at whether this change was as positive as you thought it would be or not. Continually evaluate and assess this change. Speak to your airmen. Keep that two-way communication going and see how things are going for them on their end. So again, let's stop and think here now. How can you implement and sustain change in your organization? So here we have the entire 8 steps again. And like I said at the beginning of this, it seems like a lot. There's 8 separate steps, but you've got 3 broader categories, and a lot of them are all very related. And you've seen examples of these all over the place that have been successful. So creating a climate for change. How have we done that? You've got a mission. You've got a vision that's easily understood. You've got a great team made up of different individuals in your organization of all ranks and ages and experience levels. You also have engaging and enabling the organization. That comes down to effective communication. Speaking to the airmen out there in the field, what makes this change difficult for them or not? Maybe they don't have that bucket in which they can put their FOD, and that's an easy systematic barrier to remove. And again, create short-term wins that are visible to everyone. Finally, implementation and sustaining. How can you make this change now that we've implemented it, people are working within it, how can it be a part of our daily culture? It's just who we are, not something we're trying to do. Now, I know that's been a lot. We've talked about the different steps that we've talked about within a change model and how you can have a plan in implementing change successfully. Again, if you're here with me today, you're listening to this, you're concerned about change, or there's a change that you think would be good for our Air Force, you're already a leader in change. So what are airmen looking to for you? What can you do to be a more effective leader in change? There are 6 different things I want to talk to you about in regards to being a leader. First of all, again, and I meant to mention this a moment ago, you'll notice all 6 of these, you'll see are clearly related to that change management process we just spoke about. So to begin with, understanding and appreciating their world. It comes back again to communication. Are you speaking to your airmen? And more importantly, are you listening to them? Do you appreciate what world they live in? Is this change really being implemented in a way that's helpful to them? Create leverage and offer empowering alternatives. So you want to implement this change. Maybe it's not all or nothing. To be honest with you, generally that's good practice. Let's go for a 10% change and then add 10 and add 10. 100% all the time, every day, right off the bat is a really hard way to go. So what small changes can you make on the path to success? And then how can you leverage those to build upon them? Communicate, communicate, communicate. Like I said at the start of this, I'm going to mention it again and again and again. Communicate often and transparently. Another key element here is that we're going to make mistakes. We're human. We're going to make mistakes in our communication as well. Make sure you're transparent and open about it. What challenges are you facing in implementing this change? Maybe this change has been really hard for you in this regard. How so? Be open and honest with people about that. I promise you they'll appreciate it and they'll make the change easier for you and for them. Be a problem solver and a role model. I know that's easy to say, but the change that you're implementing, if you're not a part of that change, if you're not out there doing that change on a daily basis, that's hard to sell. You need to be out there on the front lines as well, very visibly coming up with solutions, dealing with the issues yourself, and being a role model for this change. If you want people to worry about FOD and check for FOD, join them on the FOD walks. Check those magnetic bars yourself. It goes a long way in creating that culture and climate for change that we talked about in the beginning of this. Preventing backsliding. You know, we talked about that, and this is another one that's easy to say, it's hard to do. But how can you prevent backsliding? Continue to have a positive attitude. Talk about making it a part of your culture and who you do. Again, with communication, think about communicating in different types and different medias. Maybe people need job aids posted throughout the organization where they constantly see a reminder on the wall, or they constantly are getting messages throughout years reminding them of this change. Hey, don't forget this. Finally, creating a supportive environment. And this, the last one, it goes back to the very first thing that we talked about. Creating a good climate. You're there to support people. Remember that 70% failure rate. Change is hard. It's hard for people to change what they've been doing. Maybe it's something that they've done for years and they've got to do it in a different way. You don't want to come down on them with a hammer right away because they forgot to do this one thing after 20 years of doing it a different way. How can you be supportive, helpful, and engaging? So now those are all things that you personally can do as a change leader in your organization. We've talked about a lot of different things today. Quite a few of them we've talked about all come back to the same ideas, such as communication, removing barriers, being present, being a listening, attentive leader. But where we began was that definition of change management. Going back to that, think about that definition. It was all about supporting and engaging the people. And the whole goal here is to ensure success. As you're well aware, being our nation's warfighters, we're on the front edge of change at all times. And if not, we definitely should be. It's a hard thing to do, but we must do it. How can we best do that, best prepare for change? How can we be a part of that 30% success rate? We can have a process that we utilize to engage with change. Kotter's eight-step management model is one that is well proven. It's been used throughout industries with great success. What organizations should do to embrace change, think again about what we talked about with systematic barriers, things that you can make it easier for your airmen to do to embrace change. Think about your communication. Utilize your PA offices. Utilize CE. Make changes in your organization so that it's just constantly present. It's constantly in people's vision. Finally, you must be the role model for change. Now, we talked about a lot of things with managing change in our Air Force. Here I want to leave you with a quote from John Kotter. And again, this is something we've talked about a lot here, but to directly address it, in change processes, you have to win the hearts and the minds of the people. I'm going to leave you with some resources. I'm going to put them up, and I'll be on for a few moments if you'd like to add anything in the chat. Here are the resources that I've used. I've mentioned John Kotter quite a few times. That book, Leading Change, is where that model came from. And you can find it all over the internet as well. And again, if you have anything to add in the chat, if you have any questions to ask, let's hear from you right now. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for attending the TEC University's virtual classroom. Have a great drill weekend.
TEC University. Education your way.